My experience of enlightenment in the desert enabled me to achieve the Christ consciousness to the large extent while on earth. But you can follow in my steps if you have the will to do so, and I will surely be at hand to help you on your journey. You may feel my presence if you are sufficiently sensitive to do so, but if for some time you feel nothing, do not be cast down, because as you do the work of changing your consciousness, you can be absolutely certain you will be tuning into my Christ consciousness, and I will be aware of all that is happening to you. Know that your purpose on earth is to ascend in spiritual consciousness until you transcend all the humanhood which presently holds you back, until eventually you too can control the elements and become a master. Realize too that when world consciousness is fully attuned to Father creative consciousness, all things inimical to the perfect well-being of man will disappear. There will be no more malaria-bearing mosquitoes, locusts to strip your crops, severe climatic conditions, infections, viruses, and everything else which presently cause problems for living things. You will live within a cloak of universal protection. When your own consciousness is perfectly attuned to and in harmony with Father love, then you too will be divinely protected and will become channels of creative design, growth, nutrition and nourishment, protection, healing, regeneration, fulfillment of need, law and order. Father love will be operational within your mind, heart, body, and your affairs. It will be operational all those to whom you direct its power. End of letter 1. Christ returns, speaks his truth. Letter 2. This letter should be pondered rather than read. I am the Christ. Whilst I operate from the highest realms of divine creative consciousness, my influence encircles your world. Speaking metaphorically, I am as distant in consciousness from your world as your sun is distant from your earth. Yet if you call on me sincerely, I am as close to you as is necessary to help you. There are many who will be unable to receive these letters. Such people are not yet ready for them. There will be those who will try to stifle their existence, since the teaching will be threatening their livelihood or religion. They will not succeed. These letters will be strengthened by opposition. There will be those who will receive these letters with joy, since their souls they have known that beyond the religions of the world has been truth, the reality of existence. These are the people who will prosper and eventually save the world from self-annihilation. I will now take up my autobiography from where I left off in my last letter. My purpose in giving you some of the biographical details of my entrance into public life as teacher and healer is to bring alive for you my youthful attitudes and behavior, the circumstance of my attaining my own state of spiritualized humanhood. It is important you should be able to visualize Palestine as it was when I was on earth, and clearly see the inner conflicts which my teaching aroused in the people indoctrinated in their Jewish beliefs and traditional rites. These conflicts lie at the heart of the Gospeler's inability to record accurately all that I tried to teach him. In the Gospels are frequent references to my parables describing the reality of the kingdom of heaven or kingdom of God, which term the Gospelers use, but nowhere has any attempt been made to reach into the words themselves, explore the figure of speech, or lift out of the spiritual meaning of the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven. As I speak of my true sermons given to the people, you will, in the light of my experiences in the desert and of your own knowledge of scientific facts, be able to understand at last a little of what I was attempting to teach at the time. Since I was largely unsuccessful, it is imperative another attempt should be made to do so. At the beginning of this age, this millennium, since it is on my privileged highest spiritual knowledge and insight that the next age will be founded and developed. It was and is essential for a teacher such as I, and others have been, super sensitive and wholly committed mentally and emotionally to a search for truth of existence. To come to earth to coin words, to describe to people on earth, imprisoned in words, what lies in the creative universal dimension, in an unformed state. Were it not for such inspired teachers, people on earth would have remained in ignorance of all the lies beyond the earth, ready for contact to be personally experienced and absorbed to promote future spiritual evolution. Not only this, the Bible is said to be the most widely read book in the world. In its present form, it has served its purposes. The New Testament, as it stands, with all its baggages of misinterpretation, is a deterrent to spiritual evolution. It is now time to move forward into a new realm of mystical perception and understanding. Since it is impossible for me to descend into human body again to speak to the world, and I have other dimensions to whom I minister, I have trained a sensitive soul to receive and transcribe. It is the nearest I can do to talking to you personally, I hope you will be able to receive and accept this. Whatever is erroneous is erased. You may be sure of this. The incidents and healings related in the following pages are not important. They happen, but they are given only to enable you to understand their true spiritual significance. I want you, as you read, to relate the condition of 2,000 years ago to your present life and times. I want you to regard the persona of Jesus as an icon of what can eventually be achieved by every human being who is ready and willing to become a founder member of the kingdom of heaven on earth. Although people of your present world are what you call sophisticated, big-headed in their modern knowledge and learning, versed in contemporary manners, and in new ways of relating to one another, basically, the people of these years ago were the same as yourself. They were controlled and motivated entirely by their twin impulses of bonding rejection, desires repulsions, even as you are. They loved, hated, criticized, condemned, slandered, and gossiped, possessed ambitions to rise to the top of society, despised those who were failures in life, secretly slept around, as you call it, and taunted those who were different in any way to themselves. To help you fully understand and enter into my time on earth, my consciousness has descended to your plane of earthly existence to experience yet again the persona of Jesus and the emotion and events in which I was involved. When I left the desert and put foot to the road leading to my village of Nazareth, I was still elated, exuberantly joyous in a knowledge so glorious revealed to me in the desert. I focused my thoughts entirely on all that I had learned, and if my thoughts stayed to my former negative forms of thought, I swiftly turned to the Father for inspiration and determination in overcoming them. In this way, I returned constantly to the light of awareness and understanding. Some people looked at me askance, seeking my joy and also my dirty, unkempt appearance. Was I happy with drink, they wondered. Others looked at me with abhorrence. Instead of reacting with anger as in the past, I remember that I had been blessed with visions and knowledge that they could not even begin to imagine. I blessed them and prayed for their inner vision to be similarly opened, and continued peacefully along the road to my home. There were villagers, however, who viewed my pitiful state with compassion and hurried into their houses to fetch me bread, and even wine to help me on my way. There was always someone who offered shelter for the night. The Father Life indeed supplied all my needs and gave me protection as needed. All this time, I said not a word about my weeks in a desert. I felt that the time was not yet ripe. Eventually, I reached my hometown Nazareth, and the villagers openly scoffed, pointing at my filthy self and tattered clothes. Dirty, lazy layabout were some of the kinder words thrown at me. I came to my mother's door with a feeling of dread, since I knew she would be more shocked than the neighbors when she saw me stand in front of her, thin bones showing through skin, eyes sunken and cheeks hollowed out, face burned black and lips blistered with the sun, and beard grown long and staggly. My clothes, she would be outraged when she saw my clothes, their original color wholly obscured by desert dust and a cloth torn and ragged. I mounted the steps and braced myself to endure the heat of my mother's fury. When I knocked, my sister came to the door. She looked at me, open-mouthed, wide-eyed, and frightened, then slammed the door in my face. I could hear her running to the back of the house screaming, "Mother, come quickly, there's a dirty old man at the door." I could hear my mother muttering crossly to herself, hurrying to the door. Flinging she open, she stood, rooted in her shock. I smiled but for a moment. She looked me up and down with increasing horror as she realized this dreadful creature was indeed her wayward son, Jesus. I held out my hand to her, saying, "I know I cause you much pain, but can you help me?" Immediately her expression changed, and drawing me inside, she secured the door. "Quick," she said to my frightened sister, "stop that noise and put water on the boil. Your brother is starved. It doesn't matter what trouble he has got into. He belongs to us. He must be looked after." Gently she helped me take off my clothes and bent me over a large container of water and scrubbed me clean. She washed and trimmed my hair and beard and lightly covered the sores on my body and lips with a healing salve. Neither of us broke the silence. I savored the love she showed me and tried to show my gratitude by a more gentle and sensitive approach. Having helped me put on a clean robe, she sat me down to a frugal meal of bread, milk, and honey. Reluctantly, she gave me wine to pick up my strength, but it was obvious she thought that wine had been the cause of my shocking plight. Then she led me to a bed and placed a cover over me. I slept for several hours and woke refreshed to a morning bright with sunshine seen through the window. I was now longing to talk to my mother, to tell her that I was indeed a Messiah, but not the kind the Jews imagined. I could save people from the bad results of their sins. I could help them find health, abundance, fulfillment of their needs. because I could now teach him exactly how the Word had been created. As I tried to tell her, she started off by being excited and delighted. She jumped to her feet and wanted to rush out to tell the neighbors her son was indeed the Messiah. They should hear how nicely he now talked, and he had been fasting in the desert. But I stopped her from doing this. I told her that I had not yet told her what she had been revealed to me. One of the most important things I had learned was that the Orthodox Jews were entirely wrong in their belief in an avenging God. There was no such thing. This frightened and upset her, and she exclaimed, "How then will Jehovah govern the world and make us good and listen to his prophets, if he doesn't punish us? Are you now so big that you are going to tell the high priests their own business handed down to them from the time of Moses? Are you going to bring more shame on the house?" She began to cry, saying with anger, "You've not changed a bit. You're only changed in what you're saying. You have brought me nothing but grief. How could I ever believe you would be a Messiah? You will only lead people into greater torment than ever before with your strange ideas." My brother heard her wailing and came running, wanting to turn me out of the house. Because I did not want a disturbance, I offered to leave peacefully. In this was how my mother reacted. I could be sure that everyone else would react in the same way to what I wanted to tell them. I realized I needed a quiet time of absolute rest and silence in which to collect all my thoughts and experiences together. I would have to pray for inspired guidance on how best to approach the Jews with my message of good news. I was sure that the Father life would meet my need, and I would find the right accommodation somewhere. My mother, although furious with my seemingly big-headed attitudes, was nonetheless torn with her feelings of love and compassion for my emaciated condition. She rejected everything I appeared to stand for: rebelliousness, contempt for the Jewish religion, high-handed attitude towards authority, my self-will and arrogance. But she still loved me and was deeply afraid that I would eventually end up in greater trouble than I'd ever thought possible. She admonished my brothers, telling them to hold their noisy arguments and turn to me. "You can stay here until you are better," she said. "Perhaps, whilst you are here, I can talk some sense into you. I can tell you now, if you go into the streets and begin talking as you have to me, you will end up in an even worse state than ever. Good people will spit and throw their rotten rubbish over you. You are a disgrace to your family." So, despite her anger, I laughed and thanked and kissed her warmly. Gladly, I remained with her, knowing very well that underneath her anger, she was deeply anxious for me. She fed me well and made me good new clothes. I appreciated all she did towards improving my appearance, as I knew to move freely between rich and poor, I must be acceptably clad in decent garments. At times, there were food shortages in the home. Drawing on the power of my father, I replenished them, saying nothing. Neither did she. I knew she wondered sadly whether to all my other bad habits I had now added that of a thief. Then she caught me with a freshly baked loaf in my hands, and knew that I had not been out of the house to buy it, and neither had a stove been in use that day. She said nothing, but gave me a long pondering look. I could see her attitudes change at the moment, but she was no longer sure of her ground. She was beginning to question her own attitudes towards me, and also the truth of my statements. What really happened to him out in the desert? How could he make a loaf of bread without fire, flour, and yeast? What does it mean? Is he the Messiah? Then my brother cut his hand. He was in much pain when it festered. He allowed me to put my hands on his wound and quietly pray. I could see that he felt the power flow into his hand, because he looked at me strangely. "The pain is gone," he said briefly. He was surly as he walked away, and I knew that whilst he was relieved to be free of pain, he did not like me for having been able to help him. I sensed his jealousy. My sister scalded her hand, and another complained of bad headaches. I was able to cure them both. My brothers and sisters began to joke about my magic powers. They questioned what evil I might do to them if they angered me. The tension in the home deepened, and I felt sadness for my mother, who longed for peace in the house. But she saw changes in my behavior and was comforted. I was quieter, visibly controlled, likely outburst, reined in my energy, curbed impatience, no longer argued. I became more caring, listened to her womanly grumbles, helped her in the house by repairing broken furniture, and walked the hills to distant farms to find the fruit and vegetables she wanted. I came to love her tenderly and compassionately as a mother should be loved. One day she ventured to ask me, "Do you still say that Jehovah is a myth?" Job said that if Jehovah were to withdraw his breath, all flesh would collapse together. That is Jehovah I believe in and saw. "No one has seen Jehovah," she said firmly. "I saw that which has brought all things into being," I replied quietly. "I call it the Father, because it is perfect love. Love more perfect than a mother's," I added, smiling at her. It works in, through, and for all its creation. It is the Father in me which has brought you the things you needed in the house and healed my brothers and sisters so swiftly. I could see she was beginning to understand a little of what I said. What of sin, she asked. There is no sin as we understand it. We are born to behave as we do. We have to find a way to overcome our human thoughts and feelings, for they separate us from the protection of the Father and brings us our sickness and misery. When we have learned how to overcome the self, we will enter the kingdom of heaven. My mother turned away silently, obviously pondered what I had said to her, but no longer angry. I knew she was thinking about my statements and realized they would be turning her safe and well-known world upside down. Without her belief in a Jehovah threatening dire vengeance if mankind was unruly, she would feel lost and insecure. She would wonder how the world would ever manage if it was left entirely to men to control the evil doings of themselves and others. Even kings and governors were wicked in their actions. Without Jehovah to rule and punish sinners, where would it end? Whilst gaining my strength, I studied the scriptures diligently to enable me to meet Pharisees and scribes with confidence. I was also imperative I should know what had been written of the Messiah, because I was convinced I was he of whom the prophets had spoken. I could indeed rescue, save people from misery, sickness, and poverty, even restore them to health and prosperity, by showing them the truth concerning the kingdom of heaven and the reality of the Father. When I felt I was sufficiently prepared to go out and teach and heal to please my mother, I agreed to go one Sabbath to the synagogue in Nazareth and speak to the congregation. As was customary, I stood up and was handed Isaiah to read. I chose the passage prophesizing a Messiah would come who would release the Jews from every type of bondage. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovering of the sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. Then I sat down, saying, Today you have seen this prophecy fulfilled in me. There was a shock and amazement on the men's faces, but I continued to speak, knowing that the Father would tell me what to say. The words came without hesitation. I spoke about my experience in the desert and related my vision of the baby growing into manhood, all the while, unknowingly, wrapping himself around with mental thongs and chains, thus blinding and imprisoning himself into interior darkness and shutting himself off from God. I explained that in doing so they expose themselves to oppression from conquerors, slavery, poverty, and disease. For God is light, I said, and light is the substance of all visible things, and light is love, which makes all things for man to enjoy. All blessings of abundance and health were freely available to him who loved God with mind, heart, and soul, and lived strictly according to the laws of God. When I had finished, there was complete silence in the synagogue. I felt that the congregation had experienced something strange and powerful, and had been lifted into a higher plane of thought, and wanted nothing to disturb the transcendent tranquility of the moment. Then the whispering started among themselves. They were wondering who I was. Some were convinced that I was the person Jesus, whose family was known in the village. But others could not accept this, since I had spoken as one having authority. Unfortunately, I felt my own reactions of these religious men returning. I knew they had despised me in the past, and so I expected rejection. I slipped back into my own challenging attitudes and thoroughly angered them. Through my own human reactions, I invited disaster, and disaster I almost got. The younger men, urged on by their elders, rushed at me and dragged me to the highest cliff top to hurl me to death. But I prayed to my Father for deliverance. Suddenly, it seemed that they were so stirred up, they hardly knew what they were doing and turned on each other. I was able to slip from their midst and escape. It was strange. They seemed not to notice my going. Badly shaken by my experience, I managed to send a message to my mother, saying I was leaving Nazareth immediately and was going down to Capernaum.
Looking to get rid of that old stump in your front yard? If so, call the experts at Express Tree Service to get the job done right. With over 25 years of experience, we have been providing the surrounding area with the best in professional tree services for both residential and commercial properties. Our services include tree trimming, health evaluations, stump removal, and more. Plus, ask about our snow removal. Call Express Tree Service today. We go out on a limb for you.
As a gracious town by the Sea of Galilee. At first, I thought to join an old acquaintance, but I felt intuitively this was not the right thing to do. So all the way down, and on entering the town, I prayed for the Father's direction and help in finding accommodation. I had no money and would not beg. As I walked the street, a woman of middle years came towards me, heavily laden with baskets on her arms. Her countenance was sorrowful. It seemed she had been crying. On impulse, I stopped her and asked her where I might find accommodations. She said briefly that she would normally offer me a bed, but she had a very sick son at home. She added that she had been to buy provisions to feed the comforters who had already gathered to mourn when her son died. My heart grieved for her, but also rejoiced. Straightway, I had been led to someone I could help. I expressed my sympathy and offered to carry her baskets to her house. She looked at me for a moment, wondering who it might be, but was apparently satisfied by my appearance and demeanor. On the way, I said that I could probably help her son. "Are you a doctor?" she asked. I replied that I had received no medical training, but nonetheless I could help him. On reaching her house, large and well built of stone, indicating social standing and prosperity, she took me to her husband, saying, "This man says he can help our son." He nodded morosely but said nothing. The woman, Miriam, drew me away, saying he was distressed and very angry. The boy is our only son amongst many daughters, and he is blaming God for giving the child the sickness. Miriam wept. If he speaks like this against God, what other troubles will be headed upon us, I wonder? "Take comfort," I said. "Shortly your son will be well again." She looked doubtful, but led me to the room in which the boy lay. It was hot and stifling, and filled with gloomy, talkative well-wishers. I asked the mother to clear the room, but the visitors were resistant. They wanted to see what would be done, and only left reluctantly when Miriam called her husband to speak to them. I could hear them arguing with the father in the next room. What did he think this man could do if the doctor had been unable to help the boy? The father came into the room to see for himself. His son was deathly pale and had a high fever. The mother explained he could not keep his food down and had loose bowels. He had been like that for several days and had lost so much weight the doctor had said nothing could be done for him. He would probably die. I placed my hand on the boy's head and prayed, knowing and silently giving heartful thanks that the father's life would flow down through my hands and into his body. Thus the healing work would be accomplished. I felt extreme heat and tingling vibration in my hands, and the power pouring into his frail body. I was overcome with joyous thanksgiving. How great, how wonderful was the Father of life when released to do its natural work of healing. His mother and father, looking anxious, wondering what would happen next, held each other's hands and watched intently. As they saw their son's color gradually change from white to a more healthy glow, they exclaimed in astonishment and delight. After some time, the boy looked up at me, saying brightly, "Thank you, I am well now. I am hungry and want something to eat." His mother laughed with happiness and held him close, but also looked apprehensive. "I cannot give you food, my son. The doctor will be angry." She had been warned to starve him of all but water. I smiled and said, "He is cured. You can give him bread and wine, and he will keep it down." His father, Zedekiah, was all amazed, joy, and gratitude. After embracing his beloved boy, he turned to me and wrung my hands warmly. He kept patting my shoulder, but shaking his head, unable to speak for the tears which were running down his cheeks. When he had largely recovered his composure, he went through the living room and said to the people, "My son, almost dead, has been returned to fullness of life again." His words were met with a great clamor of jubilation, excitement, disbelief, questioning, laughter, and congratulations. The boy's mother stood there, her face wreathed in smiles. At that, there was no question of needing accommodation. When Zedekiah told the astonished comforter that the boy was cured, and the youth himself appeared smiling at the door and asked yet again for food, the well-wishers, one and all, gathered around me and invited me to their homes. However, I preferred to remain with the boy's father, who now said he had many questions to ask me. He hoped I could answer them. After food and wine were placed on the table and everyone was invited to eat their fill, Zedekiah sat down and asked his first question. He said, "You have done something no priest or doctor could do. Healing only comes of God. Although you are a stranger, I perceive you must come from God." "Yes," I said, and the people murmured wonderingly. "This illness, which has come upon my son, was this a punishment for something I have done wrong in the past? And how could I commit so grievous a sin that God should want to take my only son from me?" Many of the people nodded when they heard these words. "You have asked the question I most want to answer, Zedekiah. God gives us life and being. He would not snatch away as a man will snatch some treasure from another man, because he is angry with him. This is the way that mankind behaves, not God. And God is not placed on a throne in some part of the sky like human kings sit on thrones and govern their people. This is the human way and a human belief, not truth.